Ludwig Wittgenstein was born in 1889 in Vienna, into one of the wealthiest and most cultured families of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. His father, Karl Wittgenstein, was an industrial magnate in the steel industry, and his mother, Leopoldine, came from a prosperous Jewish family that had converted to Catholicism. From early childhood, Ludwig was surrounded by intellectual stimulation, music, and art, yet also exposed to the pressures and expectations of extreme wealth and prominence. The family home hosted musicians, artists, and thinkers, and Ludwig grew up in an atmosphere where excellence was demanded and failure was unacceptable. This environment shaped his relentless self-criticism and the profound sense of responsibility that would define his life. Wittgenstein's childhood was marked by contradictions, privilege combined with a deep sensitivity to human suffering and moral questions. He excelled in mathematics and the sciences, yet was drawn to music, literature, and philosophy. Despite wealth, he experienced feelings of alienation and isolation. His father's stern and sometimes tyrannical manner instilled both discipline and fear, while his siblings, many of whom were artistic prodigies, intensified a climate of competition. From an early age, Ludwig displayed uncompromising intensity and a tendency to internalize moral and existential dilemmas, as though ordinary life could not satisfy him. He initially studied mechanical engineering in Berlin and later in Manchester, focusing on aeronautics and the foundations of physics. During these years, he became fascinated by the philosophy of mathematics, particularly the work of Gottlob Frege. Wittgenstein's extraordinary analytical abilities, combined with a perfectionist temperament, drew him into philosophy. By 1911, he had moved to Cambridge to study under Bertrand Russell, one of the leading logicians and philosophers of the time. Russell immediately recognized his brilliance, yet Wittgenstein's approach was radically different. He sought not only clarity in logical problems, but a deep understanding of the limits and structure of language itself, and ultimately, the conditions for meaningful thought. Wittgenstein's early philosophical work culminated in the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, written largely during the First World War. In it, he argued that the world consists of facts, not things, and that language functions as a mirror of reality. Sentences are meaningful only insofar as they correspond to states of affairs. Beyond this, he contended, language collapses into nonsense. The work aimed to delineate the limits of thought and expression, proposing that philosophy's role is not to speculate, but to clarify. In its austere precision, the Tractatus exemplified Wittgenstein's perfectionism, his refusal to compromise with ambiguity, and his deep preoccupation with the boundaries of human understanding. The First World War had a profound personal impact on Wittgenstein. He served in the Austro-Hungarian army, first as a soldier and later in the artillery, experiencing combat and imprisonment on the Eastern Front. These years intensified his self-imposed austerity and ethical rigor. Even amid violence, he remained absorbed in philosophical reflection, carrying notebooks and writing fragmentary thoughts on logic, language, and ethics. He believed that the purpose of life was ethical, that philosophy was inseparable from moral reflection, and that intellectual work required personal integrity. The war left deep psychological scars, contributing to lifelong oscillations between self-doubt, moral torment, and bursts of creative insight. After the war, Wittgenstein renounced his inheritance, giving much of his fortune to his siblings, and sought a life of ascetic simplicity. He worked as an elementary school teacher in rural Austrian villages under harsh conditions. Teaching became an extension of his ethical experimentation, a way to confront ordinary life and impose moral rigor on himself. His experiences were often demoralizing, yet they reflected his determination to live according to principles he had developed in philosophy. In the 1920s, Wittgenstein returned to Cambridge and began teaching. His intensity and exacting standards made him both revered and feared. He engaged students in dialogues rather than formal lectures, challenging them to think rigorously, question assumptions, and confront their own limitations. His insistence on intellectual honesty and moral seriousness could be both inspiring and exhausting, reflecting the persistent tension in his life between brilliance and torment. During this period, Wittgenstein's philosophical concerns shifted. He began to question the foundational ideas of the Tractatus, particularly the notion that language could perfectly mirror reality. This introspective reassessment led to what is now called his later philosophy, culminating in philosophical investigations. He argued that meaning is not determined by abstract correspondence, but emerges from practical use within forms of life. Language is a living, social phenomenon, embedded in shared practices and contingent contexts. Philosophical problems arise when language is misapplied or misunderstood, creating confusion rather than substantive questions. The later Wittgenstein emphasized ordinary experience, the interplay of rules, and attention to the subtleties of human interaction. Wittgenstein's personal life remained marked by intensity and emotional turbulence. He struggled with profound self-doubt, periods of isolation, and a sense of inadequacy despite his intellectual achievements. He never married and maintained few close personal relationships, though his bond with his sister Margaretha and his students was significant. He was known for bursts of warmth, generosity, and humor, yet these were interspersed with episodes of withdrawal, asceticism, and existential anxiety. His genius was inseparable from the suffering it entailed, and his temperament reflected continual confrontation with ethical and intellectual demands he imposed on himself. He also engaged in practical labor, working as a gardener, architect, and hospital orderly. These were not mere hobbies but extensions of his philosophy. He sought to live ethically, confronting ordinary existence with the rigor he applied to logic and language. Work became a form of moral practice, cultivating humility, patience, and attentiveness. These experiences reinforced his belief that philosophy must remain grounded in life, that insight is inseparable from action, and that intellectual achievement without ethical engagement is incomplete. By the 1930s and 1940s, Wittgenstein's reputation as a philosopher was established, yet he oscillated between teaching and periods of solitude. He lectured extensively at Cambridge, inspiring students while revising and refining his ideas. His lectures were legendary for intensity, depth, and unpredictability. Students often left both exhilarated and exhausted, encountering a thinker whose brilliance was inseparable from moral and emotional exactitude. Wittgenstein's philosophy demanded not only intellectual engagement, but ethical vigilance, requiring that thinkers confront assumptions and limitations honestly. The Second World War reinforced his sense of human fragility and moral urgency. Though not directly involved in combat, he served as a hospital porter and teacher, witnessing suffering and ethical dilemmas firsthand. These experiences emphasize that philosophy must remain tied to reality, that abstract speculation is insufficient, and that clarity, attention, and responsibility are indispensable. Wittgenstein's writings from this period stress the contingency of human understanding, the importance of shared practices, and the ethical dimensions of thought and communication. In his final years, Wittgenstein continued to teach, revise, and reflect on language, ethics, and ordinary life. He suffered from ill health, particularly prostate cancer, and confronted death with a combination of discipline, reflection, and acceptance. Even in mortality, he emphasized the ethical dimensions of life and thought, showing that moral clarity, intellectual rigor, and attention to ordinary experience are inseparable. Ludwig Wittgenstein died in 1951 in Cambridge, leaving two of the most influential philosophical works of the 20th century, the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus and Philosophical Investigations. These works share a commitment to clarity, ethical seriousness, and the exploration of human understanding. His life exemplifies the intertwining of genius and suffering, the ethical and the intellectual, and the pursuit of insight in a world defined by contingency, limitation, and moral complexity. Wittgenstein transformed philosophy into a practice inseparable from life, insisting that thought, language, and action are bound together by responsibility and attention. He demonstrated that genius is rarely comfortable, that insight demands struggle, and that the pursuit of truth is inseparable from ethical rigor. His life and work remain a profound testament to the challenges, burdens, and possibilities of human thought and moral engagement.